Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe my channel. Enjoy the listening. Human mechanics saved an albino alien wolf with a broken leg, but years later it shockingly brought. Crichton was the sort of planet that devoured hope slowly. It wasn't dramatic like a war zone or cruel like a slave world. It just wore everything down. The wind carved the stone into tired shapes, the sun baked the color out of the sky, and the people, what few remained, got quieter each cycle. Lennox Acre had been here for 5 years, alone, nestled in a rust-bitten valley where derelict miners left behind more junk than ore. He fixed things, ships, crawlers, broken drones, but mostly he fixed silence. That morning started like the others, grit in his boots, oil on his fingers, breakfast from a tube. Until, while stripping parts off an old survey rover, the alert beacon chirped faintly on his console. Proximity breach. Not unusual, the winds sometimes knocked loose metal across his boundary wires. He wiped his hands, pulled on a coat, and stepped out. Then he saw it. At first he thought it was another piece of scrap blown in from the canyons, a pale heap near the ridgeline, but it moved. He jogged closer, his boots kicking up dry soil. As he approached, the shape clarified. It was an animal. No, not just an animal, but a wolf alien clearly larger than any terrestrial breed. Its limbs were built for leaping across rough terrain, its coat pure white with a faint silvery shimmer now mudded with blood and dust. One leg was wrong, bent, crushed. The creature raised its head as he approached, snarling through the pain. But its luminous, sharp eyes were pleading more than angry. Lennox crouched slowly and murmured, "Hey, easy now." It didn't run, it couldn't. The back leg was clearly shattered, with bone jutting through the skin in a ragged protrusion. He saw gashes along its side, too, maybe from a rockfall or a fight. No collar, no tag, no signs of ownership, just a survivor. He remembered a field medic once told him back during the Teldrin skirmishes that some animals had a way of knowing when a person meant no harm. Maybe it was scent, maybe it was just a kind of quiet. Lennox moved gently, step by step, until he was close enough to touch the wolf. By some miracle, she let him. Sliding his arms beneath the trembling frame, he braced the injured limb and lifted her. She didn't bite him, she didn't cry. Instead, she rested her head against his chest, her breath warm and fast, and allowed him to carry her home. Inside the workshop, Lennox cleared off the worktop he normally reserved for engine repair. The white wolf lay still, her sides heaving, blood soaking into the fabric of his old mechanic's coat that he had wrapped around her. He had seen animals die before, shot, crushed, starved, but never one so proud, so silent in its suffering. She hadn't made a sound since he brought her in, and that worried him more than the broken bone. He worked fast. He scavenged the last of his surgical gel from the med box, boiled water, and sterilized the tools he had. Her fur was matted with grime and sand, but beneath it, her frame was solid muscle, coiled tight, built for speed and power. She fought to get this far, and now her life was in his hands. Resetting the bone was the worst part. He had set breaks in humans before, but this was different. Her anatomy wasn't mapped in any Earth database. Still, the structure was close enough to guess. He studied the angles, made measurements, and when he braced himself and pulled, her body jerked violently. Her jaws clenched, but no howl escaped her throat. "Not for her, for himself," Lennox whispered steadily. "Stay with me, girl. Come on, you're tougher than this." The leg went back into place with a sickening crack. He wrapped it in a splint rigged from carbon rods, padded it with insulation foam. 3 hours later, she was stable, sedated, resting under a low-heat lamp while the gel-knit tissue beneath the surface began to mend. He sat beside her, exhausted, staring at the fire lines on the metal ceiling. He hadn't named anything in years, not since his dog back home on Earth, a lifetime ago. But now, looking at the wolf breathing steadily beside him, something old stirred, memory perhaps, or something stranger. "Lysa," he said aloud. The name didn't come from anywhere he knew, but it felt right. Her ear twitched almost in response. Lennox leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyelids heavy. Outside, the wind howled over the canyon. Inside, for the first time in a long while, something was healing. Lysa didn't speak, of course, but in the days that followed, Lennox learned to read her in ways that had nothing to do with language. She lay curled on the repair table for 3 nights, unmoving save for the slight flick of her ears and the steady rise and fall of her ribs. Lennox slept nearby in his tool chair, the makeshift splint always within reach. At the slightest twitch from her, He would monitor her vitals using scavenged biosensors meant for mining suits. They weren't designed for creatures like her, but he tweaked the calibration until the readouts made some kind of sense. Each day, she improved, subtle but certain. The swelling in her leg reduced, her pupils cleared and grew more focused. By the fourth morning, she lifted her head and growled weakly when he entered with a ration pack. "That's right," he muttered, tossing her a strip of protein. "Growl at the guy who saved your life." She didn't eat it right away, she just stared at him, her ears pinned back as if calculating. Then, without breaking eye contact, she dragged the strip toward her jaws and chewed slowly, measured. Lennox smiled. "You're welcome." After that, something shifted. She no longer pretended to sleep when he entered. Instead, she tracked him across the room, nose twitching whenever he fired up the welding torch or oiled a rotor. Although her body still betrayed her injury, she watched always, eyes like moonlight over ice. There was intelligence in them, far more than animal instinct. Perhaps it was because the silence on Crichton could be unbearable, or maybe she simply listened. He told her about the ship that crashed 4 years ago, the one that stranded him here after his crew sold him out for a bounty he hadn't earned. He told her about the first time he piloted a fusion hauler through a binary storm and didn't die. He told her about the last message from Earth, his sister's voice, shaky and apologetic, before the line cut out forever. Lysa never interrupted, never judged. She just lay there, breathing in rhythm with the hum of machines, eyes steady and open. Then came the first real movement. Lennox had been replacing a rusted panel on the solar array just outside the door when he heard a scraping sound. He looked back and froze. Lysa had left the repair table. She was dragging herself slowly, carefully, across the floor toward the generator's heat vent. Her injured leg remained stiff, but the other three moved together like pistons, flawed but determined. "Whoa, hey now, easy," he said, rushing to her side. She growled as he reached for her but didn't snap. Instead, she collapsed near the vent, her chest rising and falling like bellows. After a moment, she rested her head on his boot. "Stubborn old thing," he whispered. "You're going to live." She didn't move, but he swore that somewhere deep in her chest, he felt a low, rumbling purr. Lysa's recovery took weeks. Lennox built a modified exoskeletal brace that supported her damaged leg as the bones realigned. It was a Frankenstein mess of shock absorbers, carbon weave, and scavenged drone joints, ugly but effective. With it, Lysa could move awkwardly at first, then with increasing fluidity. She paced the workshop like a queen in exile, her strides precise, her gaze unflinching. Outside, Crichton roared on. Dust storms raked the compound every few days. Pirates passed overhead in the distance, uninterested in an abandoned mechanic's hut. Still, Lennox kept the motion sensors armed and the rail gun patched. He didn't trust this planet, never had, but with Lysa around, he felt safer. There was something primal in her presence. Even half-healed, she radiated the calm confidence of a creature who had endured worse than storms. On the 6th week, she followed him outside for the first time. He didn't call her. She simply stood at the door, watching the wind, then walked forward on her own. The brace held her stride unevenly, but she didn't limp, not anymore. They reached the edge of the ridge together, where the land dropped away into a valley choked with wreckage. Half-melted mining rigs, rusting solar towers, the remains of old machines left to die. Lennox looked over the edge, hands buried in his coat pockets, eyes distant. "This place chews everything up," he said, "even people." Lysa stood beside him, head low, fur whipping in the wind. Then she growled low and deep. Lennox turned. "What is it?" he asked. Her ears were forward, body rigid. Something was moving in the wreckage below. He squinted. The motion sensors hadn't gone off, probably because it was too far. Then he saw it, glints of movement, not animals, not scavengers, drones, or old war types, outdated tech, but still dangerous. Someone had activated them. Crichton was lawless, but even here, nobody revived autonomous war drones unless they were looking for something or someone. Nothing brought attention faster than a working unit. "We need to move," he muttered. "Come on." But Lysa didn't follow. She stared at the valley, and without waiting for a command, she leapt down the ridge. "Lysa, wait," he called, but she was gone, a flash of white and steel moving like thunder through the shadows. Lennox scrambled after her. By the time he reached the first wreck, she had already closed the gap. He heard the crack of metal, the screech of a blade, an arm splitting a drone's carcass as it skidded past him, smoking. Then Lysa appeared again, bracing on her legs, hurling her weight into the next unit. Her teeth sank deep into the exposed wiring. Sparks sprayed the sand. Gods, Lennox breathed. You're a damn monster. Within minutes, the last drone dropped. Lysa stood atop the wreck, panting, the wind tearing through her fur. Her brace was damaged, one of the stabilizers had snapped, but she held herself tall, proud, unyielding. She turned to Lennox, blood spattered along her flank, and huffed a statement, a promise. She had been broken once, but not anymore, and nothing on this world would ever hurt her again. After the attack, Lennox reinforced the compound's perimeter with every working component he could scavenge. He spent 2 nights welding new mounts to the rail gun, rewiring his dormant thermal sensors, and coding a rotating firewall into the outpost's ancient defense grid. He didn't speak much, not even to Lysa, but she stayed close, never far from his shadow. The war drones hadn't wandered in by accident. Lennox knew that someone had activated them, maybe even from orbit. Perhaps they had picked up on the signal spike when he calibrated Lysa's brace the week before. He hadn't masked the broadcast, a rookie mistake he hadn't made in years, and he cursed himself while staying busy. Meanwhile, Lysa prowled the edges of the compound. Her movements grew fluid. The exobrace was almost unnecessary now. She walked without hesitation, her gait regaining that feral rhythm that had been stripped away the day she crashed into his life. She barely used the brace anymore, except when sprinting across unstable terrain. Then one night she didn't return. Lennox didn't panic immediately. Lysa had been taking longer walks, sometimes gone for an hour or two, but when the moons crossed zenith and the winds began to scream through the steel husks outside, a knot tightened in his chest. He braced himself, grabbed a plasma pistol and one of the old scout drones he'd patched together for emergencies, and scanned the ridge. There was nothing. The dust was thick, and there were no tracks. The drone picked up heat signatures deeper in the valley, near the Ghost Ridge, where the old miner ruins decayed like bones under the sky. Following the ruins, which were dark and silent yet not empty, he found her at the edge of a collapsed silo, crouched low, ears pinned back. She wasn't alone. Another shape moved beside her, a smaller, faster wolf with fur striped with sand, brown and gray. Its frame was smaller, younger, and it snarled as Lennox approached. Lysa stepped between them instantly, her body bracing protectively. Lennox raised his hands. "Okay, easy," he said. The brown wolf studied him with narrowed eyes, then turned and bolted into the wreckage. Lysa didn't chase, it simply watched it go. Lennox approached slowly. "Friend of yours?" he asked. She didn't respond, she just sat down, her tail sweeping the sand, head tilted in that quiet, thoughtful way she always had. Only later, when they returned to the compound, did Lennox see what she'd brought back, a trail of fresh meat stashed by the door. It was not scavenged, but hunted. Lysa hadn't been lost. She'd been hunting, feeding someone or more than one. Something had shifted, and Lennox began to realize she hadn't just survived. She had built something in the shadows of this planet while he slept behind his rusted walls. 3 days passed. Lysa grew restless. She paced outside and, pausing at the gates, tilted her nose to the wind. Lennox watched her from the workbench, fingers idly stripping old copper wire as he pretended not to notice. He had questions, but he knew better than to demand answers she couldn't give. Then the canyon's signal came. It was buried in the old mining relay, a weak frequency bouncing between dead towers, masked under layers of broken code. It sounded like static at first, then like a howl dragged through a modulator. Lysa reacted instantly. She was up, claws clicking on the metal floor, eyes wide and alert. Circling the workshop with ears pinned forward and tail rigid, she asked, "What is it?" Lennox, standing, watched as she moved to the console and nudged the interface with her snout. Then she looked at him and growled, "Low, urgent," followed her outside. She led him across the ridgeline, and this time she didn't stop. They moved for hours through the dry, tense air until the canyon opened wide, its edges sharp with shattered mining rigs and slumped iron pillars. Here the signal grew louder. Lennox activated a portable scanner. Beneath the static, there was a location marker, a triangular signature of non-human ancient tech. "Someone's broadcasting," he muttered, "but not from orbit, from under this place." They found the entrance half buried beneath slag and rust. When they entered the tunnel, Lysa didn't hesitate. She ran ahead down spiraling steel corridors choked with dust and silence until they emerged into a hollow chamber deep underground. Lit by bioluminescent moss and cracked emergency lights lay not a constructed refuge, but a den, a nest. In it were 4 pups, all albino and all quiet, blinking up at the man and the mother who had returned. Lennox stared, stunned. They were hers. Lysa padded forward, licking each one gently, pressing her head into the smallest pup's side. The largest yawned and tried to climb onto her back. Then she turned to Lennox, walked back, stopped in front of him, and sat. It wasn't a growl, nor a purr, nor a bark, it was simply presence. A quiet final gesture, not of submission, but of thanks. Whatever had happened between them over the long days of slow healing had turned him into more than just a mechanic who once saved a wolf. He had become part of her pack, and now she was introducing him to the rest of it. Lysa's den beneath the canyon became a second home. At first, the pups were wary, peeking out from behind their mother's legs, wide-eyed and twitchy, unsure of Lennox and the scent of machines that clung to him. He didn't push them. Instead, he came back every day with quiet hands, a low voice, and little offerings they didn't yet know they loved. Dehydrated meat strips, heat-trapped blankets, an old hollow drone core that quickly turned into a toy. The largest pup, the first to approach, had mismatched eyes and a scar already forming above its brow. Lennox named him Bristle. The smallest one, quiet and always trailing behind, he named Pip. The other two, full of mischief and energy, were twin sisters named Ghost and Ash. They didn't understand the names, but they responded to his voice with growing comfort, slowly and cautiously beginning to see him not as something to fear, but as something familiar. Lysa watched it all from a few steps away, silent and still. Her unreadable days allowed him a silence that said more than any gesture could. One evening, Lennox brought a portable generator and set it just outside the den's entrance. He ran a single line of lights into the chamber, tiny spheres glowing with warm amber energy. The moment he powered it on, the pups leapt toward the orbs, batting and chasing them with wild glee. Their joy echoed through the hollow chamber like laughter. Lysa didn't move at first, but when one of the lights bounced close, she raised a paw and tapped it, causing it to flicker. She huffed for the first time, looked at Lennox, and let out a sound he hadn't heard before. A low, rising rumble with no threat in it, something closer to amusement. That night they all sat under the moss-lit ceiling, wolves curled around the mechanic like a strange constellation. Lennox didn't speak. He just listened to the soft breathing of the pups, the hum of the generator, and the wind whispering down from the surface above. He thought about the man he used to be before Crichton, the betrayal, the rust, and the isolation that had turned him into someone half alive. He never imagined it would be wolves that brought him back to himself, but they had. Then trouble returned with a whisper. The sky shifted before it announced danger, a tremor in the planet's magnetic field, a cold ripple through his weather sensors, and finally the unmistakable shape of a dropship entering low orbit. It wasn't a merchant vessel or a scavenger. It was a hunter-class tracker, corporate and silent, surgical in precision. They were looking for something, and they weren't looking to ask. Lennox knew this drill well. He'd helped build ships like that during his early years on the belt. Autonomous drones, thermal sweeps, ground-penetrating sonar. If they caught even a whisper of energy, if they saw the heat signature of an alien den with 4 pups and one mutated albino mother, it would be over. He bolted down into the canyon, scrambled into the den, and found Lysa awake. She was already aware. The air was charged around her. Her fur stood on end, her ears turned toward sounds no human could hear. Lennox dropped to one knee beside the pups, who whimpered, confused. "They're scanning," he said. "We have to hide all the heat." Lysa growled low and deep. Lennox had prepared for emergencies, though he hadn't planned on staying on Crichton forever. He buried power caches, scrambled field blankets, and old signal dampeners around the valley. He pulled one now from his bag, an old magnetic cloaker still half-functional, and laid it flat across the den's entrance. He then attached thermal nullifiers around the chamber. The lights dimmed, heat vanished to any scanner. The den was just another pocket of cold stone, but it wouldn't hold forever. Lysa stepped forward, her body tensed. The message was clear, she would fight. "No," Lennox said, shaking his head, "not alone." He reached into his pack and drew out the pulse rifle he hadn't touched in years. "They come for your family, they come through me." Lysa's eyes met his, wide and searching. Then, without warning, she nuzzled her snout gently against his chest. The pup stirred behind them, and outside, the first of the drones descended. It wasn't war, at least not yet, but Crichton's wind picked up, dragging sand like razors through the canyon. The skis howled, and inside the den, a man and a mother of wolves prepared to show the stars what it meant to fight, not just for survival, but for something worth dying for. They came at dusk. 3 drones, black and silent, glided low along the canyons like vultures carved from obsidian. There was no warning, no sound, just that hum of death that made the back of Lennox's neck prickle as he waited behind the makeshift barricade just outside the den. The pulse rifle in his hands felt heavier than it had in years. Inside, the pups huddled near Lysa, their wide eyes reflecting the dim glow of the emergency dampeners. She stood over them, her body lowered, her breath a low, steady rhythm, the slow thunder of a beast that had decided she would not let anything pass her. Lennox exhaled once and fired the pulse round. It caught the first drone mid-arc, shattering its rotors and sending it crashing into the rocks below in a spray of sparks. The other 2 immediately veered, adjusting their flight vectors with mechanical precision. One launched a net burst, a web of electrified coils that slammed into the canyon wall inches from where Lennox ducked. He rolled, came up behind a boulder, and fired again, this time hitting the sensor plate of the second drone, which burst with a shriek of static. The third drone returned fire. Lennox's shoulder ignited with white-hot pain as the bolt clipped him. He dropped behind cover, teeth clenched and chest heaving. Then he heard it, the growl that started deep in his bones and rose into something that shook the dust loose from the rocks. Lysa emerged from the shadows, her brace clicking softly as she stepped forward, fur rising in waves, eyes glowing like molten crystal. The drone swiveled toward her, but it was too slow. Lysa lunged. Metal and claw collided in a scream of tearing steel. Sparks exploded as her jaws clamped down on the drone's core, crushing it with a wet crunch. She landed heavily, the drone's husk twitching beneath her. She didn't stop moving. She turned immediately to Lennox, growled, then nudged him hard with her nose. He was bleeding, yes, but alive, and the den was still whole. He laughed, half from relief, half from the madness of adrenaline. "You've still got it, girl," he wheezed. Above them, more ships began descending, sleeker, silent vessels with curved hulls marked by tribal etchings, their engines quiet like breath. Lysa froze. Her eyes lifted to the sky and she howled. A sound that rose through the canyon, echoing off the stone, a high ringing note that split the wind and made every machine in the sky pause. The ships answered. 3 landed softly in the ravine. Doors opened and wolves stepped out, not just wolves, but others like her. Bigger, older, with thick fur, curved horns, and glowing marks of bioluminescent color. One stepped forward, a male, scarred across his flank, his eyes sharp. He bowed his head to Lysa. She returned the gesture, then turned to Lennox, and so did the rest. He didn't understand the words, but the message was clear. He had protected what was theirs, and now they would protect him. The invaders didn't return that night, nor the next. The tracker ships retreated once the newcomers arrived, their telemetry likely disrupted by the biosignature pulses now washing over the canyon. The valley had changed. It wasn't unclaimed anymore, it was theirs. The wolves, dozens of them, formed a loose perimeter across the canyon. They didn't build or camp, but they occupied the land, moving through the terrain with absolute understanding. The young ones learned fast. Lennox watched Pip chase her siblings around the bones of fallen drones, while Bristle took to chewing on one of Lennox's old toolboxes, dragging it across the rocks like a trophy. And Lysa stayed close every day, circling back to the den to check on her pups, then walking the edge of the workshop as if it were still hers. She napped in the sun beside the old power cells, tail curled over her nose, twitching with dreams. When Lennox patched her brace one afternoon, he teased, "You're just sentimental," to which she did nothing more than lick his cheek and walk away. Then one day she returned, not to stay, but to bring him something he'd been working on under the crawler, trying to get the stabilizers realigned. When he heard the footsteps, too many for just Lysa, he rolled out and stared. She had brought 5 of her kind with her, larger than her, perhaps older. One of them was missing an eye, another had strange blue streaks down its side. They surrounded the workshop and sat watching. Lysa stepped forward and dropped something at his feet, a cracked, glowing piece of tech, processor crystal military grade. "Where'd you get this?" he murmured as he knelt. She huffed, and he understood. There were more drones, more war machines somewhere nearby, and she wanted him to help stop them, not because she couldn't, but because he was one of them now, part of the pack. Lennox looked up at her and at the wolves behind her, at the pups playing in the dust, oblivious to the next storm coming. He stood, wiped the dirt from his hands, and smiled. "Well," he said, "let's go fix a world." Lysa barked once, and together they walked toward the canyon, where the sky opened like a broken gate and the wind whispered not of silence but of belonging.